do we know if there's progress or headway or any effect of these three efforts? And so there are two ways to look at that. One is Ryan Curran, who managed the program for the City of Seattle, was charged with coming up with, at the end of 3 years, financing for 200 units of affordable housing. That is financing for the acquisition of land in station areas for 200 units of affordable housing. So we can measure that. Did they or didn't they fund land for 200 units of affordable housing? So that's a programmatic outcome. But there were other more difficult things, community-wide outcomes. Well, 3 years, $3 million, how do you know if there's any impact? And this is primarily a planning grant anyway. How do you begin to look at that? So Ryan, and how do we understand, as was defined before, the equity impacts of efforts, or the change that's going on in the community over time? Ryan asked the help of HUD, Housing and Urban Development Department in Washington, D.C., to some consultants come out here and help develop measures for that. And they looked at what the city and the county were doing, and they said, my goodness, you guys have raised the social justice indicator programs. You take that into account in what you're doing. You guys are ahead of the curve. We don't really know what measures to use. Why don't you work with the University of Washington over the next year or two? And so we've worked on it. And the overarching, the first is to understand what are the overarching goals. And they break down into 4 broad categories: residential, cultural anchors, we discussed both those, economic development, and transportation choices. And they relate to goals that each of you have in the neighborhood plans. And we tried to summarize them briefly. In the residential arena, a goal would be to retain the mix, the ethnic, cultural, and economic diversity that exists here. We'll talk more about that. So we've tried to at least come to terms with some points of agreement about what it is we're trying to do, that is we, the city, and the community groups, and where we're trying to do it. This is the area in red is the community cornerstones area. The blue dots with circles around them are station areas. And here comes with one of the challenges. The gray areas are census tract and block groups. So how do you assemble information about the community cornerstones broad area that has some meaning? And let me just tell you that what we've come up with is imperfect and in process. So it'll be interesting because we'll have a little bit of discussion about this. What hits you as being useful for your efforts, and what do you think the city ought to be looking at? Hello. So one of the measures that we're looking at is the population, percent of population by race, ethnicity, by area. So let's take a look at the metro region, and you can see it's largely white with different ethnicities and minority and people of color populations. And Seattle sort of looks like that too. Lo and behold, Southeast Seattle looks different. And it's really, Cheryl Cashin is a law professor at Georgetown. She was the clerk to Thurgood Marshall. Thurgood Marshall was the attorney who brought the suit, Brown versus Board of Education. And his dream was an integrated America. She wrote a book 10 years ago, The Failures of Integration. And she pointed out how some of the hopes and desires from 1954 had not been realized in this country. She said, however, there are a few exceptions. And one of the exceptions she highlighted is Southeast Seattle. And she highlighted it because of this pie chart. Because there is no majority. There is actual diversity between white, Asian, Pacific Islander, Black, and African American. And she went further. It really didn't, it was within a single block where that mixture occurred. It wasn't like there were 4 blocks that were white and then 4 blocks that were black. Something you would see much more in other cities. So I cut my teeth in Detroit, and I can tell you that that was a very different circumstance than what you're seeing in Southeast. And the reason I spent some time on this, and I think that it's something that you've already acknowledged by having a multicultural community center effort, cultural anchors, valuing diversity, is that it is one of the main data points that you can use, it seems to me, in advancing your efforts in grant applications or in identifying the specialness that exists in the community cornerstone Southeast area.